Thanks, Nurada, and also not requiring any introduction as it happens, but thank you, and thanks, Nick. And thank you, Kwasi, and the whole organizing committee for this. So, as usual, I'm going to really move through this as quickly as possible, and really it's to give you just the big picture rather than the details. These are my disclosures. So, I'm going to first, I don't have Menti thingy, but I'm just going to ask, you know, sort of by a show of hands or a few shout-outs, what do you think is the biggest barrier to new technology access? Just some ideas. What do people think? Money. Okay. What else? Information. Sorry? Policies. Political, I love this. So I actually thought you'd all say down with pharma, because that's generally what we do. You know, when we hear this, that it's the pharmaceutical costs that hold things up. But I think you've quite clearly pointed out that it's a whole range of things that can have an impact. And this is some of the barriers we faced in the past when we were, and this was around political will and the denialist phase. And so I thought I would use and take us back in history a little bit and use the analogy, because this is not our first rodeo. We have been here before where we've had to try and get technology to particularly the global south. And of course, we now look back on ARV treatment as something that kind of has almost always been there. But it was a long journey to get there. And of course, if I take you back to the 2000s, it was a devastating time when life expectancy plummeted in our part of the world, and HIV was really devastating our communities. And largely, one of the thoughts was, well, the drugs are all in the global north, and they're entirely unaffordable to the people in the global south. And then a whole lot of stuff started to happen. And here I've sort of laid it out. We don't have to go into the details, but things like, you know, importantly, first of all, the Gates Foundation is formed. CIPLA offers, you know, $350 per patient. The 3x5 initiative happens. Of course, PEPFAR is launched. Unitaid comes along, and we see Global Fund also starting to play a very important role. We see the cost of antiretrovirals over time coming down. And, you know, a couple of days ago, I pointed out to you there was a time when we were doing antiretroviral clinical trials in the face of the kinds of prices you see in 1999, but with a view to the fact that this technology would eventually be able to come to us, and the prices would come down. But I look back to those early days for another talk recently, and this is from that era of 2001, 2002, where the vast majority of our program costs were actually the purchase of the antiretrovirals. Of course, that's largely changed. There are other things, though, that made a difference. The first one was, as I mentioned, this notion that we would not be able to adhere as a whole continent to antiretrovirals. Strikingly, and this is work from Catherine Orrell, to say, no, in fact, that's not true. And more work from her in those early days to show that we could also task shift, because we certainly didn't have enough infectious diseases doctors and specialists around HIV care, that we could move this into nurses and eventually even to lay healthcare workers. And I haven't featured important NGOs such as, for example, the Treatment Action Campaign, but these individuals said, we can learn how to give out antiretrovirals and we can give them out very well indeed. And it made a huge difference. I do again want to highlight, though, that political will can be a huge barrier, or political lack of support. You just heard in drug using you know, policies, this can be a huge barrier, but it can also be overcome. And certainly this did not hold us back. We worked around an incalcitrant government in South Africa, and we still got treatment to people. The other thing that has changed, of course, the technology has improved. So the drugs of old are not the drugs we have today. People had to take them 5 times a day. They were handfuls of pills, and they caused a lot of side effects. We also had changes in policies. Initially, we went hit hard and hit fast, but these were with these very toxic drugs. We then said, no, wait until people are very ill and almost dead. And then we said, no, actually, this is an infectious disease. You should really treat the infectious disease when you diagnose it. it. So these things also made a huge difference in terms of how we went. And so today, we know that people can look and live quite normally and very successfully with antiretrovirals. And then just to say that, this graph on the bottom shows how the drugs initially were very much in the global north, and then over time, we really see antiretrovirals now moving around the whole globe, and it has had the most amazing impact. Don't want to forget the many lives that were lost in that journey, perhaps needlessly, sometimes because the drugs were unavailable, sometimes because of the attitudes we had or the policies we failed to introduce. So what improves access to new technologies? And you named a whole lot of them this morning, but I want to go through political will, innovation. We need new innovation for sure. That innovation needs solid evidence. That solid evidence then feeds into policy and recommendations and normative guidance. Implementation science can often add to that, help that process in the bridge to scale. We need the users to find it safe, accessible, convenient. It's got to appeal to them. And of course, then we need regulatory approvals as well, and this can sometimes be a lag at best. Cost and affordability is almost certainly very, very important. And then finally, demand generation. But I'm going to move through these. So the first one, I think we have to all recognize that primary prevention to end the AIDS epidemic is absolutely key and critical. We cannot do this without having real and very effective, well-functioning prevention programs, and we are behind in this regard. And we know in our region, the focus is on women, adolescent girls, but also on key populations. So we cannot leave behind the half of all the infections that are occurring around the world are in key populations. We know treatment and getting people virally suppressed is absolutely key. We heard a great session this morning about the 95-95-95, but again, without primary prevention, we really can't get to the zero infections goal. And we also need to get into our heads that this has to be taken to scale. Unlike treatment, where we have a real treatment goal of 38 million people getting onto antiretrovirals and virally suppressed, prevention is going to have to go way beyond that. This is work from Nora Rosenberg, and she works out that in our region, if we want to reduce by 250,000 infections, which is at least what we need to do to overcome the 1.3 million infections that occurred last year. We need to get PrEP to 25 million people in the next little while. So these numbers are big, and it means we have to get our heads around that moving forward. How are we doing? Well, we've done 8 million of the 10 million for oral PrEP. We've done only 2,000 of the 83,000 for the Dipivirine ring, and we've done 25,000 of the 200,000 goal we had for 2025. Let's move to innovation. And of course, innovation is really important. For the first 30 years of this epidemic, we were kind of low in our toolbox for prevention, really relying very heavily on condoms, and condoms remain the cornerstone of our prevention efforts, but clearly just not enough. And luckily, the toolkit has now moved beyond just ABC, and we are now really talking much more about PrEP and even these new long-acting agents. We do need solid evidence, and we now do know that a pill a day very effectively can prevent HIV, and very important that we keep that in our toolbox. But let's not forget medical male circumcision, and of course these new innovations such as the Dipivirine ring, long-acting cabotegravir for PrEP, long-acting lenacapavir for PrEP, and I think Francois will be going into more detail about the evidence that we have. So the HIV prevention train is looking much better, and the PrEP component of it is looking very exciting indeed, with more coming down the pike. Just want to throw in there these wonderful other notions of multi-purpose technology, the dual prevention pill, very exciting. Viatris is leading this, and we're hoping for, the bioequivalence is underway, and hopefully we'll see this in next year. And if you want to go to the AVAC PrEP Watch website, you can really get all the details of where these are. What about policy and recommendations? it really is very important that we have the normative guidance, and of course we wait for these. I'm pleased to say WHO is really ramping things up on prevention. We've already got our CAB guidelines coming out at Kigali, and we will see a recommendation, I think, for other long-acting as well then. Often these guidelines are informed by implementation science, which helps us get to bridge the scale. And we've already seen the search data shown, the power of choice, the wonderful study unfolding in Kenya and Uganda, where by giving choice, we saw a 5-fold increase in biomedical covered time. And for CAB-LA, we have all these implementation science projects rolling out, some of them unfortunately at risk because of funding, but others continuing. And it allows us to learn things like, how will people choose? And there was the question, will people still choose oral pills? Yes, in our study in Cape Town, 1/3 of people are still choosing oral PrEP when offered the choice of long-acting CAB. But very exciting, when they're on long-acting CAB, we see much better persistence, much better sort of use of the CAB for some time. We also are able to answer that question of how should we test people before they start a long-acting agent. And I'm not going into these details. These studies have been presented, but I'm making the point that this is what we can learn from those implementation science. What about safety and other things we can learn? And of course, people want to know, what is the downside of this technology? So there may be some pain that comes with getting a needle. And it's important that we show that data and we make it very clear. It's also important that we look into different populations and different settings. We know in this region, we need to know, does the drug work safely in pregnant and lactating people? What about people diagnosed with TB? What about people who are receiving gender-affirming care? What about adolescent populations, people with varying BMI, people who use and inject drugs, too often left behind, as we heard a moment ago, and people are on other medications? I want to point out that there are 3 more studies underway, even as we speak, for lenacapavir, and one of the populations is people who use and inject drugs. Very important that we do this. And then, you know, the lessons again that we learn is how do we deliver these prevention technologies? So we have shown that if you really differentiate service delivery, you can move, you can help people to adhere to prevention so much better. The work coming out of Kenya using private pharmacies, shout out to Ngura for this, really very exciting. So now we can begin to put a picture together of these technologies that help us understand how to use them and where best to use them. And PrEP is becoming 3-dimensional. There are a variety of products, there's a variety of way of delivering these products, and of course we understand users all have particular personalities. What about regulatory approvals? This is also very important. This is how it looks for DAPI Ring. Approvals only on the African continent. Long-acting injectables were first approved in 2021, so some time ago already. Authorization in a large number of countries, and we had PEPFAR procurement plans for 6 countries, as you know. Some of those are now a little bit in tatters, but very good that you know, we at least have the approvals in place. How does it look for Len? Gilead has submitted to the FDA, and we are expecting to hear from them on the 19th of June. And of course, there's also dossiers that have been handed into the EMA and the European Medicines for All, which has implications for us here in Africa. South Africa also has a dossier, so does Brazil. So very exciting that that is underway. What about cost and affordability? This is one study we've done around CAB-LA. It's in press and hopefully will shortly be coming through to show that CAB-LA would be cost-saving at $65 per year and cost-effective at $78 per year. So basically, no more than twice oral PrEP. But it can make a huge impact, as you can see, in terms of transmissions and new infections. This is work from Gesine Rath-Meyer's group on lenacapavir. In the interest of time, I'll go to the sort of bottom line, is that because it's a 6-month injection, we can tolerate a slightly higher cost because we expect more efficaciousness because of the longer use. Being 6 months. And so they say the Len threshold price should be somewhere between $32 and $59 per injection, and for them, CAB, $14 to $22 per injection. Quickly, this is how manufacturing looks and the price of CAB as far as the company is concerned. They've been able to bring the price down to $160. Manufacturing going up quite markedly in the next couple of years. Of course, the patent pool, very important. You heard earlier in the conference the importance of licensure. We know that we have to wait a long time for these patents to expire. So the way we can hurry this up is to have these licenses shared with generic companies. With DAPI ring, the POP Council has given the ring to a generic manufacturer, Chiara, and we are hoping that we will see quite a lot more rings being manufactured in the next era. The licenses for CAB have been given to 3 generic companies. You see them listed there with a large number of countries involved. Perhaps the bad news that we're going to have to wait quite some time for those generics to go through bioequivalence and licensure. So we're probably looking at 2027 for CAB. For Len, Gilead has given licenses to 6 generic companies. You see them listed there. And we are following a plan that has been laid out by a number of partners. You see them there, Global Fund, UNITAID, UNAIDS, WHO, with the Secretariat at AVAC. They really are working to see what the plan can be. We have a phased approach to getting to a target price that will allow us to move forward. Product donations to implementation science projects are happening now, and we are expecting Gilead to have 10 million doses available for the first year to tide us over to the time when generics will come. And you see a plan to get to 5 million injection initiations by 2030. This is how things are hurrying up. The pink is Len, the blue is CAB. We definitely do seem to be moving faster with some learning. So this is all the ways to get to new technologies. I would just quickly say demand generation is key as well. And in the last few minutes, Niradzo and Nick, sorry that I'm a few minutes over, I just want to remind you, Jupp Lange said, if we can get a cold bottle of Coke to every part of the world, we should be able to get HIV treatment and prevention to everyone, everywhere. But I want to say that Coca-Cola spent $5 billion in 2023 on marketing their product. So we will get this everywhere, but we also have to put demand creation into the mix. And that really needs to be exciting and fun and make sure people know. Last point I would just say is the PEPFAR freeze is going to threaten, I think, our prevention options, and we have to not let that happen. Keith Haring said many years ago, he died of AIDS, he's a wonderful artist, the only way to deal with something negative is to change it, to turn it into positive action. I'm going to really charge every single one of you to say, what is the positive action I need to do to keep primary prevention moving forward? Just in this week, Zaki Ahmad, again, was in trouble because he took on the parliament in South Africa around their attitude, and Asia Russell is in detention at this moment for having taken on the lack of will in the States. And I'll end there with lots of